Hello everyone, welcome to the Storyist. In today's video, we will discover the real power of music and how it helps fix the broken soul of a veteran director. Most of us enjoy listening to music for many reasons. Some use it as a tool to express what they're feeling. Others use it as a scapegoat for all problems they face. But some people make music as their dream and world, like James Andrew, a 20-year-old Black American from Minnesota. Ever since he was a kid, he dreamt of becoming a successful musician, like his late grandfather. He ventures into different musical instruments, like drums, guitar, piano, and clarinet. However, there's one instrument that really caught his soul, and that was the clarinet. Thus, he invested most of his time learning that instrument. He felt that he could express all his emotions through its melody. One day, James saw an advertisement posted on the university's bulletin board. His eyes opened wide, and his mouth was slightly ajar as if it wanted to shout. The poster was about a casting audition for Aurora Orchestra, one of the famous orchestras in Minnesota. Since his teenage years, he'd been listening to that orchestra. He also wanted to attend one of their concerts, but he didn't have enough money to buy a ticket. He compensated himself by listening to their videos uploaded on YouTube. James thought that he was destined to see that poster. Without hesitation, he decided to join the audition. He ran as fast as he could into the registration area and immediately filled out the forms needed. On the audition day, he woke up earlier than his usual routine. He cooked breakfast and prepared himself. James chose his lucky shirt, grabbed his favorite coat, and put on his shoes. He looked in his mirror to check if everything was perfect and looked into his old clarinet. It was somewhat old since he got his clarinet when he was just 12 years old. It was a gift from his late grandfather. The clarinet was in a medium size, faded black color, and had a gold accent. He carefully put his instrument back into its bag, then headed his way to the auditorium, where auditions would happen. James entered the auditorium with a positive aura. He first went to the reception area to take his number and fill out other documents. Out of 300 aspirants, he was number 250, but he didn't mind waiting. For him, he was already an inch closer to his dream of becoming a successful clarinetist. He sat in the corner area of the room and observed other musicians. He thought that most of them came from wealthy families because of their branded instruments. He noticed that most of the auditions were playing wind instruments, like flute, saxophone, and clarinet, which made him very nervous. All he had was an old clarinet, no brand, and with faded color. But he also had his courage and passion for music. He decided to close his eyes for a moment and think of his old memories with his grandfather, named Jonathan. James had a close relationship with him. At the age of 5, he became an orphan. His parents died in a car accident. From there, Jonathan took the responsibility of taking care of him. He was also James's first music teacher. Yet it didn't last. His grandfather died when he was only 15 years old. Reminiscing Jonathan, James decided to dedicate his orchestra audition to him. After long hours of waiting, James heard his name being called by the floor assistant. He slowly opened the door, greeted the judges, and gave them a lovely smile. There should be 5 judges based on the chairs in front of him. However, only 4 judges were present, and all of them were white. He didn't even receive a simple greeting from them, making him feel inferior. On his way to the center of the stage, he stumbled because of the wiring on the floors. "Careful, man. The audition is not yet over. We don't need a janitor here," said the man in front of him. James apologized for the minor accident he had. He explained that he was just nervous and didn't notice the wirings. He also clarified that he was not a janitor, emphasizing that he was there for the audition. The man who yelled at him was John Robert, the Aurora Orchestra director. He was in his mid-40s, and it was evident that he was at the peak of his career. "From a single look, I know who plays and doesn't," said John. James, on the other hand, insisted on hearing him play. He'd been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. He also dedicated this day to someone special to him. That's why the audition was very important. Despite James's explanation, John insisted that he wanted him out of the auditorium. He even insulted James and said that someone like him would never be in the orchestra industry. John even suggested that he focus somewhere else, like hip-hop or rap. James realized that the argument was not about how he played. It was all about his race. Being a Black American wasn't that easy. The discrimination was embedded in someone like him. To avoid making a scene, he just walked away. "Thank you for the opportunity," said James. He couldn't imagine that discrimination was present in the music industry. All he thought was music has no color. While walking on his way home, he saw a diverse group of musicians playing their musical instruments at the park and decided to approach them. James introduced himself and mentioned that he also played clarinet. He humbly asked the group if he would let him play for a bit. The group didn't hesitate to allow him to play. James stood in the middle of the park, opened his bag, and grabbed his precious clarinet. Before he started playing, he looked at the people around him. All of them were waiting for him to start. The look and anticipation he never got from the audition. James closed his eyes and felt the cool air touching his face, and started playing soulfully and passionately. The people who listened to James's melody felt his music was so powerful that some of them even had teary eyes. The more James played his clarinet, the more people gathered around him. Then, for a moment, he opened his eyes and didn't expect that he would have an audience. Because of his music, he almost forgot what happened to him a few hours ago. Later on, a diverse group of musicians joined him, playing their different instruments. They were like a street orchestra having a mini concert at the park center. James was surprised when someone wearing a business suit approached him. The man introduced himself as Robert Potter, the executive producer of Aurora Orchestra. James couldn't believe that he was talking to a producer until the man showed his calling card. Robert recognized how beautifully James played his clarinet. "Why didn't you join the audition?" asked Robert. At first, James didn't recognize the man as one of the judges from the audition. Then he remembered a vacant chair when he auditioned, and realized that perhaps it was for him. He explained to the man that he had auditioned for the Aurora Orchestra. However, he got discriminated against by a man named John. He also lost his hope in joining other auditions. He was afraid that he would get rejected again because of his race. For him, his music can only be appreciated by someone who looks like him. Robert can't imagine how his colleague John treated a young protege. Since he was the executive producer of the orchestra, he asked James to join him back in the auditorium to discuss casting for the orchestra. James didn't hesitate and agreed with Robert. They stayed in a small room and waited for John and the other judges to arrive. As they entered, Robert started to tell them that he had met a precious young man in the park, who played incredibly and touched everyone's heart. John noticed that it was the Black man from the audition earlier. He reacted negatively to Robert's idea. Then the two of them had a little argument about whether they would let James play or not. Robert stood firm on what he wanted to do with the Aurora Orchestra and let James play. Later on, James was given a chance to play his clarinet, thanks to Robert's persuasion. He stood in the middle of the room, internalized for a minute, and started playing his own composition entitled, "It's Okay Not to Be Okay." James played passionately and gave it his all. He dedicated his performance to his parents and to his grandfather. He knew that they would be so proud and happy for him if they heard him now. As James ended his music, John suddenly burst into tears. He remembered the pain brought by losing someone he loved. He walked to James and asked for his forgiveness. James forgave him right away because he knew that music has no colors and can heal someone's pain. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, stay tuned for more.